Maybe you should think about a shotgun. It only shoots in 4 directions: north, south, east, and west.
Up until recently, I thought I had seen all the movie versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Wait, Body Snatchers? Don't I mean pod people? Oh, Mandela effect! But yeah, I have seen several adaptations of the original 1955 novel, The Body Snatchers. The story about a swarm of parasitic seeds that are blown to Earth and begin assimilating the people around them, completely absorbing the host's body and mind and becoming almost indistinguishable from the original, save for the inability to feel emotion or identity. While critically panned at the time for scientific inaccuracies, it has since become one of the most influential stories in sci-fi media for its unique portrayal of an invasion of Earth. If War of the Worlds is the definitive alien hostile invasion story, then Body Snatchers is the definitive secret invasion story, where anyone, anywhere could have been possessed by an unknown intelligence with unknown intentions, that then uses their power and position to influence government, society, and the people towards ultimate takeover. It's a scary scenario, one I'm not entirely sure is truly, well, alien to actual governments and societies. Especially for the 1950s, where everyone was so scared the communists had infiltrated every sector of government, finance, and even their own neighborhoods, slowly brainwashing and turning everyone red, that it was the perfect time to rush out a filmed adaptation and capitalize on the paranoia. Because, we don't see that anymore. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was released in 1956, a scant year after the novel's publication, on a budget that, even for the 50s, was barely acceptable even for the typical low-budget drive-in theater schlock of the time. Starring Kevin McCarthy, probably best known today for playing the villain in the also cult classics Inner Space and UHF, who plays a doctor that begins to suspect that his closest friends are being replaced by exact duplicates that grow and emerge from giant vegetative pods in a matter of minutes. It's a 1950s B-movie. Stilted acting, awkward, overly written dialogue, very few props or effects, most scenes looking like they were shot in the homes and neighborhoods of the actors, and, like I said, using the story as an allegory for the communist scare, which was a popular thing back then. And it features a cameo by future legendary gritty film director Sam f***ing Peckinpah. I haven't seen it in a long time, and I remember not being that impressed or entertained by it. But I at least remember certain scenes, particularly the reveal of the alien's motive and its legendary ending. And to its credit, it is one of the few sci-fi B-movies of the time people today are probably familiar with, or at least know by name. And it did manage to make a killing at the box office and even retain a following. So much so that another adaptation was released in 1978 under the same name. Starring Donald Sutherland, and featuring Jeff Goldblum, Leonard Nimoy, and Veronica Cartwright, this, in my opinion, is the definitive film adaptation of the story. While following roughly the same premise, it features better acting, a more fleshed out story and varied cast of characters, and a much higher filming and effects budget, resulting in some truly iconic scenes and deeply disturbing imagery. Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend this dog man isn't permanently burned into my retinas. It's also where the pod people screech originated, which has gone on to be as iconic and referenced as the original material. While it made a decent profit at the box office, and is held in high regard by many critics then and now, it's also fallen into relative obscurity since its release. And to this day, it's a movie I feel is criminally overlooked. Someone says the title, and everyone just assumes the original black and white movie, which is a damn shame. I think this movie deserves a lot more attention, and is the version I recommend the most if you're curious about the films. But at least it got more attention than 1993's Body Snatchers, which I never even heard of. And let's be honest, neither of you. While it apparently got decent reviews, including high marks by Roger Ebert, who didn't like the 1978 version, it bombed hard at the box office, not even making back its scant $13 million budget, and has almost completely fallen under the radar since then. Nevertheless, it has gotten a small cult following, with many arguing it's the most psychological and allegorical of the adaptations, with a lean towards the more exploitive side of sci-fi horror. And hey, it's directed by Abel Ferrara and written by Stuart Gordon, so yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check this one out. Despite its obscurity, it sounds like a hidden gem, which is more than can be said for the 2007 adaptation, this time simply known as The Invasion. Starring Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig, this is the last and easily the least of the official film versions. While trying to establish an identity by doing away with the pod aspect and instead making it an alien fungus spread by contact that takes over the brain, well, that's pretty much all the identity it has. The only thing more frustrating than watching the movie is trying to describe why it's so bad, because it's surprisingly hard to pinpoint. Despite being made with $80 million, the movie looks so low budget and lifeless. At points, it's even harder to tell than the 50s movie who's supposed to be human and who's the emotionless alien creature. And while the other movies show worlds being slowly invaded, Earth is basically conquered halfway through this one, and the rest is just watching Nicole Kidman running through empty stores and lifeless streets. And that's about as exciting as it sounds. But the movie's biggest misstep? It has a happy ending. Which, no, this is not a story you give a happy ending. Yes, the original book had one, but the other adaptations wisely did away with that element, because it completely ruins the feeling of paranoia and hopelessness the films masterfully painted. Out of the 4 films, this is the only one I straight up don't recommend. And I'm not alone, as the movie was torn apart by critics and the audience, barely making half of its budget back, and pretty much guaranteeing that we won't see another adaptation of this classic story for a good long time. Unless you count the host, well, we won't. But it was the release of that adaptation where the Asylum decided it was a good time to cash in with their own rush job. And hey, look at that! It's actually called Invasion of the Pod People. That title is finally related to one of these movies now. And not just the completely unrelated Pod People movie, well known for being the focus of one of the best episodes of MST3K. Would I rather watch that than this movie? Oh, yeah, sure, no competition there. But let's dive in anyway and see if this movie is more than just a soulless mutant replica of its source material. A sudden meteor shower hits California, where a young woman named Melissa works as, okay, you know what, no. No. I just can't. Usually I'm able to compose myself long enough to at least get through the plot summary before I start tearing a movie to shreds, but here, no. I can't even pretend that this is a real movie. I guess in a technical sense, it resembles a movie, in that it has scenes, actors, and something that could pass for a beginning and ending, but that's as much credit as I can give it. I know I said that the next few movies after Transmorphers would likely be cheaper, easier to produce projects with far less attention given to them, but holy Hannah hanging over Holland in a handbag! Even I was unprepared for just how little of a shit anyone gave to this waste of polycarbonate plastic. I thought about starting this video off like my Frankenstein Reborn review, with me appearing on camera just to emphasize how blown away I am with how little this movie offers, but even that felt like a waste of energy. Yes, before I even say anything about the production, I am perfectly comfortable with calling this movie worse than Frankenstein Reborn. And if you're already tired of me just spouting general descriptors of the badness of this movie, well, there's your hint of how much this movie gives me to work with. Right out of the starting gate, I'm struggling to say anything about it. But I'll try. And just by saying I'll try, I've already made more of an attempt to entertain than the combined efforts of every single person on and off camera for this movie. This is just gonna hurt. And nowhere is it more obvious that this movie is going to be one of the most painful sits of the nearly 50 movies I've had to watch for this series than, well, just looking at it. Really, just a random second of footage tells you everything you need to know. I thought I was prepared for the much lower budget movies that would follow Transmorphers' then record high production costs, but wow, what was left over for this movie? $5? It's not even that this movie is the same low to no budget schlockfest we've grown to expect from the studio. It just radiates cheapness. It's hard to explain, but even for the most low-budget, low-effort movies we've seen so far, there was at least a feeling that we were watching something studio-produced. Something that visually had a crew and a budget behind it, and where people invested their time and money to make something other people might be interested in watching, even if they had to trick them to do so. This looks like someone just decided one day to make a movie. So they grabbed a camera, grabbed some friends, and started filming wherever they could, feeding the actors their lines on the spot, or just telling them to improvise based on a general idea of what they just decided the scene was about. They got all the footage they needed in a day or two, spent the next day editing it together, then published it to YouTube. where it accumulated 47 views for the rest of the year. The home movies from Home Movies didn't look this home movie. Where they decided to shoot the movie doesn't help its image. By this point, I'm used to many scenes in Asylum films being shot in what I'm assuming are the homes of the cast and crew. And that's fine, as long as the scenes are actually set in someone's home. When they're trying to convince us someone's attic is part of an office building, no. Just no. Of course, the spaces they try to pass off as the main offices are no better. It's like they went into an actual office building and said, "Ah, my good sir, we are auteurs looking to produce a motion picture, and we would like your finest office space to film it in. And, to show how serious we are, we present this crisp $50 bill to you as a down payment." Uh-huh. Well, we got a utilities room on the top floor we're not currently using. You can rent for an hour. Ah, yes, jolly good. We shall venture henceforth into the loft and create our visual spectacle post-haste. Cheerio! I don't know why I decided the location scout was Archibald Asparagus from VeggieTales. I'm just trying to give this review some kind of life. And when that budget runs out, just film the rest in the basement of Asylum headquarters. You know, it's pretty bad when your movie set work is being outdone by Birdemic. Even Deadline sprung for a few minutes of office space. I don't know, maybe the pawn shop they briefly filmed in demanded $5,000 a minute, and that's where their budget went. Oh, and color correction? What's that? Well, it's something practically every other Asylum movie was able to fake, yet is horribly inconsistent in this one. Suddenly, I'm not ashamed of my video editing. From 10 years ago, in Windows Movie Maker. And what's the best way to pretend your otherwise no-budget movie has a budget? Reuse the opening of your previous movie. Not even kidding. The beginning of this movie uses the exact same effect shots as Transmorphers, just with the polygons swapped out with formless blobs that I'm guessing are supposed to be the alien pods. I'm guessing because that's not what they look like in the movie. You want to know what they actually used for the pods?
That is seriously the strangest thing I've ever seen. Is it a cactus?
I'm not sure.
You've never seen ginger root before? Like they didn't even try to alter it to make it look alien. Was a can of spray paint not in the budget? I'll even take a crumpled up piece of green construction paper they've stuck toothpicks in. Probably would have been cheaper than fresh ginger root. I'd go out and get the stuff myself just to prove my point. But I refuse to humor this movie by wasting any more money or energy than I have to. So here's an MS Paint drawing I made instead. But if the crew had almost nothing to work with, I think the cast had even less. I used to joke that the Asylum would get their actors by dragging passersby in off the street and having them read off-screen cue cards without context. And this is the strongest I've had that feeling in years. This is legitimately the worst acting I've seen since the beginning of this look through the Asylum's filmography. Like we're right back at vampires versus zombies. There's autopilot acting, and then there's whatever this is.
Their word is out on the street that Jones and Scott are targeting some of our clients. Now we have to watch our backs.
Maybe we're just too jaded, too cynical for our own good. Maybe they really are happy people.
We just need to hustle more parties, more ass kissing.
Yes, that would be good.
What makes it even more painful is that these are accomplished Asylum actors. People we have seen give good or decent performances before. And yet, here they are, stumbling around on stage like someone's first night at improv. So I'm more inclined to believe it's in how they were directed and how obviously rushed this project was. I've actually been notified by former Asylum actors that most of them never got more than 2 takes to give their best performances. Well, for this movie, I don't think they were given more than 1 take. If they got their lines out, that's all they needed. And sometimes they weren't even given that luxury. There are scenes where the actors clearly stumble over their dialogue, or even where they'll finish speaking, then stare off blankly, like they forgot the rest of their lines or the other actor forgot their cue. Doesn't matter, as long as they finish the scene, then cut, print, move on to the next one. Guy, it really does feel like I'm watching Alien Abduction all over again.
Are you having a bad day?
No, not at all.
What if I buy you a coffee on my way back?
Bribe me with a $2 coffee to do your job. I don't think so.
And if I came in about a minute later, then you would be naked. And no. It just drive me nuts.
So maybe it's a blessing then that half the dialogue is almost completely inaudible. Yes, I'm as sick of saying it as you probably are of hearing it, but this is the 4th or 5th movie in a row with some of the worst audio I've ever heard. Like the Asylum's older movies, we're right back to sound clarity being completely reliant on background noise and how close the actors are to the microphone. And as far as I can tell, there was absolutely no post-production dubbing or other ADR work. So we have 2 flavors of audio for most of the indoor shots. That which sounds like it was recorded in a cardboard box.
You are seriously the only woman I know who's on MySpace more than a 15-year-old girl.
I know, but I'm bored and it's fun.
And that which sounds recorded in a cardboard box, with the air conditioning on at full blast.
Hey Bailey, what's up?
Sorry to barge in without an appointment.
No worries, we work for you, remember?
And if that's the inside audio, how are things outside?
I've seen that man twice from the inside my house.
Who, Zach Richardson?
Yeah, I've seen him twice and he's alive.
The only scenes that sound halfway decent are those filmed in cars. And these may be the worst scenes in the movie, because then you'll actually have to listen to these characters spout some of the most annoying, repetitive, yet still forgettable dialogue I've ever heard. Remember the idle dialogue from The Hitchhiker? Of course you don't, but that's 99% of the movie. Everyone has exactly one personality trait: pure bitch. And yes, that goes for the men too. I can't begin to tell you how much I quickly grew to hate everyone in this movie, and how little time it took for me to wish everyone would just shut the hell up. Everyone is arguing, everyone is whining, everyone is criticizing each other's life and career choices, and the friendliest anyone gets is when they're throwing around passive-aggressive compliments. Now this could work if it was meant to contrast between the actual human characters and how they act when they become emotionless plant people, but as we'll get into, the movie's not even that smart. I think they try to write Melissa as more of a pushover, someone constantly taken advantage of who lacks the self-confidence to fight back. But nothing ever comes of it, and she's ultimately just as passive-aggressive and unlikable as everyone else. It's just more evidence of a man trying to write strong, independent women for a late 2000s exploitation movie, and given only a few days to do so. And by the end, you'll be so dead inside and tuned out from the movie's endless, incoherent noise, you'll be almost indistinguishable from a pod person yourself. Okay, fine. The movie is so directionless and technically inferior that Scott Shaw is pointing and laughing at it. But if it has a good take on the formula made famous by its source material, I think it could still have something going for it. Yeah, you know the punchline by now. There is no semblance of plot or story to be found in this flick. The premise of the movie is the same as the source material and the previous adaptations, and that's it. And no, I don't mean it's a word-for-word copy of the story or a scene-for-scene reenactment of the other movies, like 666 The Child was with The Omen. I mean the premise is that aliens and pods invade Earth and secretly replace the population with plant people. That is literally the only thing of consequence that happens in the entire movie. And until that happens, we follow Melissa as she works at the business. You know, the business. The business. The busiest businessy business in all of business.
Business. Numbers. Is this working? Yes.
Yay! Yeah, we're never clued in on what Blackthorn is, or what Melissa actually does there. Oh, but it needs a model, and that model just so happens to be in town, and it's up to Melissa to get that model for the business. And she does. Pretty early on, in fact. I think this plot thread is wrapped up in the first 20 minutes. And then she just works at the business. You know, doing the work that a business requires of an employee, including pretending to talk on a phone while her coworker frantically taps away at an ancient Apple mini desktop computer. I was going to joke that they could have named the business MacGuffin Incorporated, but that would indicate it serves any purpose whatsoever. Johnny's position at the company in the room is more defined than whatever the heck Melissa is supposed to do. Also, Melissa is in an abusive relationship, I think, and her partner has to go on frequent business trips, and he might be cheating on her. And the movie has earned a tissue for sneezing that at us. We also get that trope usually seen in bad horror movies, where someone turns up dead, and the police consider the lead the prime suspect, solely because they knew the person and, well, main character importance. And seriously, has this trope ever worked in a movie? It's just padding, some artificial method to raise tension, put suspicion on our lead, and show how useless the police are going to be. Not that the movie cares either, as it's immediately forgotten after this scene, and the detective becomes well, the only likable person in the movie. Or at least the only one who actually investigates the invasion. And speaking of which, even the alien invasion is botched. Now, the horror of Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes from how stealthily and suddenly somebody could be replaced. How one of these pods could be planted anywhere. And if you stop to rest, if you let your guard down for an instant, then they will absorb you in minutes. Literally suck all the life from your desiccated husk and create a flawless duplicate that will use your memories to trap and do the same to everyone you have ever known. Unless it's the invasion, which cuts out the middleman and just assimilates you as you sleep, which, yeah, give it credit, I guess is more terrifying. Anyone, anywhere could be a monster. And unless you've been keeping a close eye on all your friends at every minute of every day since 0 hour, there's no way to trust that even just one of them isn't biding their time, waiting for the opportunity to pick you off one by one, in a process so quick and quiet, nobody will ever notice until it's too late. Whereas in this movie, the plant clones just spring to life at any time, and get rid of the original by brutally and audibly beating them to death. Yeah, Secret Invasion my ass. This is one of the most obvious takeovers ever shown in a movie. It's not like The Thing, where Ground Zero is small or isolated enough for help not to arrive until too late. This is Los Angeles. Even with how increasingly blasé city dwellers are to things happening around them, eventually somebody is going to notice. If it's not the screaming or the sound of melons being violently cracked open, or the human-sized trash bags starting to line the streets, then somebody somewhere is going to have the strength and or weapons to overpower their clone and get the attention of someone who can open an investigation and put the world on alert. Which two characters even admit they do. Minus the telling anyone about it part, because this movie is anti-substance. I mean, it might get somewhere if the victims are all single and living alone in a big house far enough from anyone else to hear, which all the characters in the movie just so happen to be. But otherwise, this invasion wouldn't last a week. And since I couldn't care less about anyone who does end up murdered by mutant vegetables, this movie has as much tension as Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers. You know, that Looney Tunes parody, which also included pod people that open at random that the characters could easily fight off or escape from, but still managed to have a point, and packed a billion times more entertainment in its 10 minutes than this movie does its 80. And I will most definitely be watching to scrub the memory of this movie from my brain after I'm done here. So the story's not the focus, the characters aren't the focus, the effects aren't the focus, even the invasion, the event the movie is named for and based around, is not the focus. Does this movie have a focus? Yes, it does. And since I waited until now to bring it up, you probably already know what I'm going to say. Heck, I'll give you 2 guesses, and be very concerned if you don't get in on the first one. Did you guess? I don't care. This is what the movie is actually all about. It's a porn. This movie is a porn. A softcore sex film they decided to tie in with an alien invasion story. Except they made no attempt to tie the sex and concept together. Half the movie is a very watered down and stretched out Body Snatchers-like plot, and the other half is someone raw-dogging it. Like the movie got bored with itself and kept switching tabs to a Brazzers video. And this movie has the least reason for being a sex film. King of the Ants featured sexual fantasies as a coping mechanism for the main lead as he was tortured. Frankenstein Reborn clarified that the doctor and his assistants were pure hedonists. And even Freak Show was about a young woman seducing a circus owner so she could inherit his fortune. And yeah, I could see someone with specific fetishes being into certain aspects of that movie. Here, no reason is ever given why everyone is so horny. Especially between the aliens who allegedly can't feel emotion or pleasure, yet are overly eager to bump uglies. They don't even give the excuse that it's how their race procreates, or how they pass thoughts and memories to each other, or heck, another way they infect unassuming humans without the need of a pod. It's just sex. Unerotic sex completely for the sake of sex. Yet that's what the movie chooses to focus on the most. There's even a 5-minute sequence where Melissa's co-workers, who by this point have all been replaced by pod people, invite Melissa over for a party, where they intoxicate her and force her to join their darkly lit lesbian orgy. Oh god, no! Yeah, what was the movie I dubbed the porniest? freak show? No, this movie is now the porniest Asylum film I've seen so far. Heck, I would strangely have more respect for this movie if it was a porn parody. A skin flick that follows the basic plot of some more famous movie or franchise, but gives a sexy twist on everything. But no, not only does the movie do nothing with its sex scenes, but the DVD packaging gives no indication that this is someone's weird fetish project. Especially my copy, which was included on a 10-movie pack that also features The Apocalypse. So, after you're shamed into accepting God as your Lord and Savior, you can switch over to a movie where people are hornier than rabbits fed a steady diet of amphetamines. Ooh, and a Cronenberg body horror movie. Best bundling decision, or worst? You make the call. So, with how many times I've brought up his movies in this review alone, and how many similarities could be drawn to his past projects, it should come as no surprise that this movie was written by Lee Scott. In the final Asylum associated film he had anything to do with. Now, I could go on a rant about how this is easily his absolute worst project, to the point it makes every single other movie of his I've had problems with look watchable by comparison. And it is, but I get the impression he also wanted nothing to do with this movie. I am 87.5% convinced that this is a spite script. Something made after the creator in question had a major falling out with the studio, but was still contractually obligated to produce one more project. So they half-assed something in one afternoon, slammed it down on the producer's desk, and stormed out the door, never to return. Like what likely happened with the earlier Detour movie, or the infamous Squidge game for the ZX Spectrum. I guess it's also possible that this was an early script he wrote that the Asylum sat on until this moment, or even that he turned in a good script, but due to the low budget and incredibly tight deadline, it was completely butchered during production. Or maybe it was the other two guys credited with the story, both of whom have filmographies almost entirely comprised of documentary and behind-the-scenes work, and both of whom also pretty much disappear after making this movie. I wanted to personally ask Lee what happened, as well as some other questions about his work, but I couldn't find a way to contact him. Well, whatever happened, this movie reeks of obligation and apathy. And if this is how Lee was being treated at this point, I salute him for leaving when he did. But he did stick around long enough to give us his final obligatory cameo, where he plays a guy who randomly breaks into Melissa's house to insanely ramble about people being replaced by alien invaders. And this being his last Asylum movie, does he at least go out with a bang? Further convincing me that Lee Scott was rushed and or pressured into making this movie, this is the only Lee Scott written movie not directed by him. By this point, he had better things to do, like fly to Romania so he could direct Flu Bird Horror. Instead, directing duties were handled by Justin Jones, who also appears in this movie, in his second and final role as director for the Asylum. Again, I don't know how much crap to give him, considering the rushed and cynical nature of this project, and that he has served as assistant director for a good number of Asylum and Lee Scott movies. But this and The Apocalypse don't paint his directing abilities in that great a light. I guess I'll have to check out his later directing work to see if they're better indicators of his talents. And because Thomas Downey is in a good chunk of them, there's surprisingly not much to go over concerning the rest of the cast. Most of the names involved are Asylum regulars we've seen in quite a few past productions. And most of the new names are people who have done stuff. The only new faces worth bringing up are Danae Nason, who technically made her Asylum debut with Transmorphers, and who has 2 more Asylum films to her name before she went on to do stuff. And apparently, making her only Asylum appearance here is Terry Fruichante, also known by her online alter ego, Frutron. I say apparently because, even though she's credited, I couldn't find her in this movie, so maybe her scenes were cut. But she's an actress for stuff, directed and produced the independent weed-themed dramedy 420, and, along with collaborator Kimmy Kim, hosts the YouTube channel Hollywood is Hard, where they make fun random videos. So, if that's your thing, check them out. But I brought her up mainly because her IMDb page has a strange fascination with Jesus Toast. But more notable than the names joining the Asylum are the names that are leaving. Yeah, following The Apocalypse and Transmorphers, this is yet another movie featuring a mass exodus of frequent Asylum actors. So let's bid farewell to Erica Kessler, Shaylee Scott, David Schick, and Marat Glazer. Technically, this is also Jessica Bork's final Asylum film role, but she'll later appear in an episode of Z Nation. And we'll be seeing Amanda Ward, Sarah Leaving, and Michael Tower in some future projects. And while he's not credited in either the movie or IMDb, that's clearly Jeff Denton as the bartender, making this his final appearance in the Asylum movie. and probably the last time he'll be featured on this channel. Unless I ever decide to do that Lee Scott retrospective, in which case we'll probably see him in that upcoming Little Mermaid movie, if that ever becomes a thing. The only element I can call meh about this movie is the camera. Now, the camera work isn't good, but it's not as bad as it could have been. A lot of shots in this movie are in weird close-ups, where we can basically see every pore on the actors' faces, but they're not even centered in the frame. Quite a few shots are at waist level, barely keeping the actors' heads from being chopped off by the top of the frame, and resulting in half the actor disappearing when they get up and leave. There's no method to the madness. I can't detect any style or reasoning behind why these shots are framed the way they are. Just set the camera up so we can see the actors, get the shot, then move on to the next. Though I will give credit that the camera is kept mostly still, or at least controlled throughout most of the movie, so it's not another 9/11 Commission report headache. There's also an unbroken shot, where we see Shaylee Scott's character watering the alien pod, then it tilts up to show her watering her other plants, then back down to show the pod has disappeared. I'm a sucker for sequences that keep the action rolling in real time for as long as possible. The following sequence with Shaylee Scott's pod duplicate also isn't done that badly. Obviously, they didn't have the time or budget to show two versions of the actress on screen at the same time, but they do utilize a good mixture of angles and stunt doubles to present a passable scene of her clone beating her to death. I guess the B-roll is done well as well, giving us some passing, though impressive shots of the Los Angeles cityscape. So, in terms of actually being able to watch what's going on, the movie does score a few points, which are then all taken away with how much the editing abuses the fade to black transition. The movie also doesn't end as terribly as it could have. Melissa is trapped in a room where everyone she's ever known has been replaced by pod people, with her clone soon to be arriving. The detective's duplicate shows up, asks if she's been cloned yet, and then shoots the other pod people, revealing he was able to fight off his clone and get to Melissa just in time. They get out of there and go to pick up Melissa's friend Billy, where the detective also reveals that the plant people's pupils don't dilate, the best way to tell the original from the duplicate. Melissa and Billy run to their homes to get some things, where Melissa has to deal with her boyfriend, who has been replaced by a clone. Afterwards, Melissa drives over to pick up Billy, and everyone seems safe and sound. Until Melissa calls Billy, wondering where she is. Billy is trapped with the fake Melissa, as we hear the real Melissa give a terrifying scream over the phone. And the movie ends with fake Billy getting in the car, telling real Billy everything's going to be alright. Again, it's not a good ending, but considering how everyone is in full who gives a damn mode, I was expecting the movie to just cut to black at some random point and roll credits. In fact, this ending's almost too good for this movie. Where was any of this in what we just had to sit through? Where was this kind of creativity or revelation or just relation to the original source material? If the rest of the movie was given this kind of attention, well, it wouldn't have been good, but I could have at least called it a movie, as opposed to a disgusting, overflowing dumpster that they at least wrapped up with a cute bow. What else do I even say? I think I gave this movie more attention than it deserved the second I started watching it. This is clearly something nobody wanted to make, nobody had any confidence in, and just had to create because, well, it was mandated that they had to. And the result of their creation was absolute nothing. Plot, story, characters, effects, creative writing, or camera work, all essential elements missing from this movie. Like it actually was created by a group of emotionless pod people. And then there's all the sex and the rape, with no reason for any of the sex or rape. What does any of this have to do with mutant plant people from across the galaxy assimilating humanity into their hive mind? Nothing! Literally nothing! I feel sorry for anyone and everyone involved, especially for everyone where this was their last project. Transmorphers was at least a milestone for the studio, a triumph to go out on. What actors would proudly admit they were in this wet fart of an afterthought? This movie is shit. Yeah, I know I usually bleep it out when I say that, but in this case, it's literally shit. It was produced without care or consideration, excreted onto the shelves of any video store that would have it, and currently stinks up the catalogs and resumes of anyone and everyone associated with it. I could very easily call this the worst Asylum movie I have ever seen, and probably ever will see. But even that feels like I'm giving it too much credit. This movie isn't trying to stand out or be anything, it's just something that exists. Even that's being generous. Still, among all the garbage that the Asylum has produced, this deserves to be ranked among the stinkiest, formless, most toxic sludge ever burned to a DVD. It may not leave much of an impact, but the impact it does leave is one of the most painful experiences you'll ever have to endure. And if you try to show this to anyone, well, this is the reaction you're gonna get. Alright, next movie. Yeah, I don't have a teaser for the next film. I just want to wash my hands of this flick and move on. I'm not even gonna do the whole, well, it can't be any worse than what I just watched bit, because I know for a fact, for a cold hard fact, that the next movie can't possibly be worse than what I just watched. Hey there, you reached the end of the video. The names scrolling are the awesome people who are keeping the channel going. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Sukaretta. Thanks for your support. If you'd also like to see your name here, please consider heading over to my Patreon, where you can choose a tier and reap the rewards within. And while you're here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It's how these videos get noticed, and what encourages me to continue making them. Whatever you decide, stay awesome, keep watching, and I'll see you next time.